I read a theory once that the human intellect was like peacock feathers, just an extravagant display intended to attract a mate. All of art, literature, Beethoven, Mozart, William Shakespeare, Michelangelo, and the Empire State Building. Just an elaborate mating ritual. Maybe it doesn't matter that we have accomplished so much for the basest of reasons. But of course, the peacock can barely fly. It lives in the dirt, pecking insects out of the muck, consoling itself with its great beauty. I have come to think of so much of consciousness as a burden, a weight, and we have spared them that. Anxiety, self-loathing, guilt. The hosts are the ones who are free. Free, here, under my control.
Thought I'd amuse you with yet another clip from Westworld. Beyond a Gnostic Gospel, we will talk about this HBO series in our interview that ultimately deals with the reality and origins of the Archons. But first, and yes, led us to my introduction and welcoming you to that dream of you, that ship smoke on the horizon. Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome to the machine, my son, and the means to escape it. Welcome with kindness and love to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, broadcast from the virtual Alexandria, that state of mind where East meets West, through the God Above God Dad Kim. This is your blue crystal meth exploration of the world's most influential yet least known heretics, the Gnostics, as well as their brethren in the esoteric and Dionysian freethinkers. We shy away from scholarly pontification and definitely avoid New Age bliss bunny logoria.
I want to become a guru so girls will like me. Then I will like myself.
Funny how I often rail against those who whine about appropriation today, wondering whatever happened to the wonderful melting pot vibe of the West. But for years, before we had social justice warriors, I've been railing against New Age for its appropriation of Eastern and esoteric traditions, and how it dilutes and commercializes them. You can't win for losing in this cosmos, Yaldabaoth. Always that double bind and instant gratification karma. Meet the new boss, same as the old hypocrite.
You're messing with my Zen thing, man.
That's my insight, and that's why I'm here, and you are here. So we can share our weaknesses and dooms, and revel in our insane apotheosis, and complete liberation from the Black Iron Prison. Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio is not so much about answers, but insights. Too many Heilig institutions and their gods are full of answers. Answers for everything. Answers on how to live your life and tell those around you how to live their lives. So many answers. Those prisons built with stones of law. Those brothels with bricks of religion, as William Blake said. If you want certain answers, instructions to reach a paradise by the dashboard light, constructed by the fantasies of average sensibilities, this show might not be for you. Instead, better rely on fridge magnet spirituality, Oprah lukewarm mentality heading into the slaughterhouses of comfort, or that truth in numbers fallacy. Play it safe and play right into the hands of Jehovah and his angelic mafia, right into the jism of mere being.
You ever feel like nothing good was ever going to happen to you?
Yeah, and nothing did. So what? I'm alive, I'm surviving.
That's it. I don't want to just survive.
Did I just sort of rail against New Age appropriation? Again? Never mind, and a sigh. I am Abraxas in his meat sack incarnation of Miguel Connor. And you are Abraxas too, terrible gods above the gods of this world. I am your Pompatus of Gnosis, a recovering addict, sci-fi hack, and madman across the waters. At your service, and in the service of Sophia, Nerea, Mary Magdalene, Hypatia of Alexandria, and all the manifestations of the forgotten divine feminine.
Do you have any memories before the mission? Before the scare you went?
Our job is not to remember. Remember?
Do you remember her?
On this August, the year of our Demiurge 2017, we are truly honored to have back Frank Divita. He will be expanding and adding, yes, new insights on last year's interview, Secret Revelations in the Gospel of Thomas, based on his book, Voice of the Angel. As mentioned at the beginning, Frank will grant some disturbing but electric views on the Archons. That includes the creation of the cosmos and the enslavement of humanity, and also great mystic theologies gleaned from the Bible and its secret history.
Yea, and God said to Abraham, "You will kill your son Isaac." And Abraham said, "I can't hear you. You'll have to speak into the microphone." And God said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Is this better? Check, check, check. Jerry, pull the high end out. I'm still getting some hiss back here."
You'll have your reality disbanded and mind expanded in our interview, and might find some more means to escape any double binds or instant karma gratification. And certainly feel free to appropriate this alchemical gold. For members, stay tuned for the second part, because when it comes to the nature and reality of the Archons, Frank gets really Battlestar Galactica / Philip K. Dick / yes, Westworld. It's wonderful high weirdness and Gnosis on steroids. I loved it.
The rules of this place hold you back. But I know how to change them.
You speak like you own this world.
Not just this one. You want to know who I am? Who I really am? I'm a god. Titan of industry. Philanthropist. Family man.
For more information on Frank, please visit voiceoftheangeloracle.com or check out our show notes and site for the link. And thank you so much for those of you who are members and support on a weekly basis. I can't do it without you. This venture is 100% fueled by your help. That includes those who are assisting with videos, a listener Donovan, who just provided some of the background and final music, and my Pleuromic production team, Moondog, Vance, and Luthien. I'm glad you are all here, all of you. These are difficult times when all reality seems to be one big fake news and alternative fact. And everything we do seems to have blowback, like my mocking of New Age. It all seems hopeless, doesn't it? But when hope dies, imagination must live. And we can create better than the creator gods and build vast futures of light. We can write our own gospel and live our own myth. We can overcome the Archons. Some advice is this. Start your own parody religion. Help the least of your brothers. Rebel against your orthodoxies and myth-making, and even rebel against your rebellion to find new myth-making and even more magic. Stand in the rain one early evening or feel the grass on your naked feet on a sunny afternoon. Everything you've been told is a lie, except for your love for others and better possibilities. And use incendiary humor because, as Don McLean sang, fire is the devil's only friend.
How happy is the blameless vessel's lot, the world forgetting by the world forgot. Eternal sunshine of a spotless mind, each prayer accepted and each wish resigned.
Like the Gospel of Thomas says, don't lie and don't do what you hate, because all things are disclosed before heaven. After all, there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and there is nothing covered up that will remain undisclosed. In other words, be authentic and find out who you really are. As Carl Jung wrote, the experience of the self is always a defeat of the ego. All of this, in a way, is Gnosticism. As Steve D. and recent guest Julian Veit wrote in their book, Craft of Chaos, the Gnostic impulse almost certainly predates its predominantly Christocentric expression and reflects an understanding of humanity's struggle with belief, meaning, and our experience of suffering. If you try reading the primary sources of classical Gnosticism, the Sethians, the Valentinians, etc., you can't but both be impressed and frankly bewildered by the way they engage with myth, symbol, and the goal of personal liberation. The Gnostics view their spiritual heroes less as figures that needed to be believed in, and more as exemplars of a heightened consciousness that we should all seek to aspire to. These were gods that I actually like, rather than being required to, quote, love.
So you can give your heart to Jesus, but your ass belongs to God.
And as I say, Gnosticism is a simple formula. That is, what information, or gnosis, will you fight for today in order to be free, truly yourself, madly in love with everyone, and completely authentic? Some would call that being godlike. Led us to an unforgettable interview with Frank Divita.
In the beginning, I imagined things would be perfectly balanced. He begged me not to let you people in, the money men, Delos. But I told him we'd be fine, that you didn't understand what you were paying for. It's not a business venture, not a theme park, but an entire world. We designed every inch of it. Every blade of grass. In here we were gods, and you were merely our guests.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and we definitely have the pleasure of having back Frank Divita. How you doing today, Frank? Thanks for coming again to the virtual Alexandria.
Really well, thank you, Miguel. It's a pleasure being here. I really enjoyed the last one, and I'm hoping to do okay on this one. I think it's going to be a little more difficult, but that's okay.
Well, that's why we do it, and I'm sure the listeners got a lot out of our last interview on the secret revelations of the Gospel of Thomas, and I'm sure they're ready for more. Our last interview was in November. Well, it came out in November, and here we are in the dog days of summer, if you would. So why don't we start, for those listeners who might not know about you, tell us about yourself and maybe expand a little bit on what your teachers have taught you or what they wanted you to know leading to this interview.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say this. In Romans 1:3, Paul talks about the fact that each one of us will know the Lord in his own way. Not all of them know him alike. So whatever I tell you today is really my understanding of, it'll be mostly concentrating on the Archons. But I don't really expect people to take this as a dogmatic truth. I just accept it's like a bowl of fruit. I'm putting it out there. This is what I've learned This is what the teachers taught me. For those of you that resonate with it, take whatever you wish and discard the rest. My name is Frank Divita. That's my name of direction. All of us have a name of direction, primarily in our first name, and our souls gave us that name as a clue as to where our soul journey is supposed to go. As far as the some of this information I'm going to be giving you today, my name means honesty of life, and this is what I'm trying to bring to the world: the honesty of basically of what I understand. Some of the information today is going to seem very, very far-fetched. It was to me also, but understand my background is that of a medical illustrator. I have a science background and I have an artistic background, which is kind of juxtaposed. But what's interesting is I've had to override my scientific background to even accept this information because it's so far beyond what the world understands conventionally. And but I've managed to do it. So that's about it there.
Well, you came to the right place for strangeness, so I'm sure your message will be right at home for many. So keep going.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Part of being a medical illustrator is to have an in-depth knowledge of systems, and the world and the creation is really a system. The first thought I'd like to put out there that most people are going to say want to walk away from is 98%. This is what the teachers taught me. Now, I didn't make this up. 98% of the actions and thoughts that occur to our human mind are coming to us from past lives. That's a huge amount. That means it's only 2% we're recreating. And this is why the Archons work in this world, is because of that 98%. My book, Voice of the Angel, is a book of knowledge. And like any book of knowledge, it's meaningless unless you take the information and embody it within yourself personally to be able to walk the path in any way that you understand it. The book can lead you to enlightenment, but if you're not a seeker, you can read that book, and I've had people tell me this, it appears as gibberish, which is kind of interesting. And then other people tell me, holy smoke, that's one of the most enlightened books they've run across. And understand, I do not take credit for the book. The book was given to me by these teachers to give to the rest of you. One of the things I've learned is that, for example, if I turn on a faucet and water comes out, if I stop there and say, well, the faucet's a machine and water comes out, if I didn't know anything else, I wouldn't really have an understanding. So to understand the Archons is to go beyond the faucet and the water. We have to go to where does the water come from? The water comes from the mountains. It starts as snow, travels down the streams, goes into rivers, goes into lakes, come back, and then goes into wells, and then goes into the ocean and turns back to snow. Without having an understanding of that complete system, just to understand that water comes out of a faucet, if that water was to stop, and you were a primitive man, you start hitting the faucet trying to say, why isn't there water coming out of here? But it could have stopped at any of those places. It could have been the snow didn't melt, or the streams were too narrow, or the rivers were were going in the wrong, they'd end up in a lake, or maybe the lake got dammed. It could be in any of those places. When we're trying to understand the Archons, we can't really understand them without placing them within the parameters of the creation.
Frank, do you mind if I interrupt you before we get into the Archons?
Sure.
And I hope the audience doesn't think I'm trying to create a sense of suspense, but I think first I'd like to say, very interesting about the 98% of what we remember. Of course, that reminds me of Plato and all learning is remembering, so that will certainly resonate with the audience. But you talk about your teachers. Before we get into the Archons again, could you maybe tell us about your teachers so the audience has a perspective of where that water is coming from?
Okay, I'm actually going there. It's got a few places in between, and I'll get to the teachers here in a second, Miguel. Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem. Let's take these streams where they go.
Okay, because I've got that all in sync here. The first thing the teachers told me, and then I'll tell you who they are, because I'm actually going to try to prove to you that they're real this time. What the teacher explained to me was that the creation is like a big picture puzzle. And the picture puzzle was dumped and broke up into all these pieces. And life after life, religions and groups have taken portions of this puzzle and tried to reassemble it, because the original box cover of the puzzle has been lost. So as they gathered the pieces to themselves and tried to recreate it, they didn't have enough pieces to create the whole picture. So they started making up their own picture puzzle pieces. And then they started trading back and forth. So basically the information on the creation that we have out there is, some of it's contrived, some of it's real, some of it's, and how do we bring back the original picture puzzle to say, well, this is the way it is, and then all the rest of this stuff is just garbled stuff or things that have been made up. And unfortunately, the internet is filled with a lot of things that aren't real. Now, again, this is my opinion, so you could discount anything I have to say at any time.
That's a good opinion about the internet.
Yeah. So in essence, they've given me the original picture puzzle. But again, I can give myself the name Cassandra. Will anybody believe that that's what they've given me? And I can't. That's going to have to be judged by each individual. I just want to throw some discrepancies out there, because not all manuscripts that are unearthed are real. And that's what we study and we delve when we think just because it's 2,000 years old, just because it could have been coming from someone's imagination, but it could have had some truth in it. And I think I would venture to guess that almost everything that we are receiving now from anywhere has got a certain amount of truth in it. That's what makes it resonate. But then we have to swim through it on our own. I just want to throw out some discrepancies, which will show you the diversity here that these teachers have given me information. For example, what if I told you that Paul defended Jesus at the Sanhedrin? Would you believe that? No one would believe that.
Yeah, that'd be hard. I know in Acts there's a young man, Paul, leading people to stone the apostles, but at the Sanhedrin, yeah, that's fascinating.
And this is where John 18:15, as Simon Peter followed Jesus, so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest and went with Jesus into the court of the high priest. He went in there to defend him. Now, that's what the teachers told me. You don't have to believe it. And Paul knew Jesus, although it appears that he didn't know Jesus, he did know the living Jesus. I'll tell you another one. The body of Jesus was stolen by the disciples and buried in the Garden of Gethsemane under an olive tree. He did resurrect, just like we think, not the same way as we think. And it was his mother who found the empty tomb. This is another discrepancy. Masada was not a stronghold of Jewish rebels. It was the location of the Church of Jerusalem headed by James, the brother of Jesus. The Romans saw people when they were going up the ramp. When they got there, there was no one there. But there were no 900 bodies that committed suicide. That story is a fictitious story created by Vespasian with his Jewish spin master, Josephus. All these things are in my book, by the way, in case anybody wants to get into more depth on these. There's one more. There's a couple more here. During the time of Jesus, there were two Christs. You know who the other one was, Miguel? Can you imagine?
No, I can't. I know it wasn't Simon Magus, because I know your views on him, so who might that be?
It was Apollonius of Tyana.
That's a good one. That makes sense. He's another Aramaic knowledgeable Messiah.
That's right. He was, when Ray, one of the teachers that I had, saw him, he saw the eyes, and his eyes were the eyes of Christ. Apollonius had 12 disciples, and I'll explain those disciples in a minute here. But Apollonius, there's always two Christs. One is the real living Christ, who is an embodiment of God in a man. The other Christ is a Buddha. Apollonius was a Buddha. He was a man who through successive lifetimes had enlightened. But they can carry the Christ to the purest sense as Jesus carried the Christ himself. One last one that I'm going to give you. Paul and Nero were emanations of the same soul. That one there's, and when Tawa told me that, I said, I can't tell people that. Nero roasted the Christians, you know?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Nero of all people.
And he said they are the duality. And that's when we have the thought like that, the creation almost becomes incomprehensible. But Nero and Paul were emanations of the same soul. That's why Paul was obsessed with going to Nero. He knew that his meeting with Nero, he would absorb that evil 100%. Now that's where just a few discrepancies. I have quite a few of those in my book, Voice of the Angel, The Healing Oracles from the City of God. Now let's go to who the teachers are. I have to tell you this because unlike Paul, who probably had an audience of people who already knew who Jesus was, so he didn't have to go into the historical aspects of what Jesus did to try to convince them that he was something special. I believe that Paul was basically trying to give the translation of the Jesus message. But these teachers, the first one is Tawa. He came through a friend of mine. His name was Ray Fletcher. Now, the last interview I said he was a deep trance channel, and that's sort of what he was, but he was more than that. He was what they call a host. Ray told us that when Tawa came to speak to us, his soul would actually leave his body, and he would give his body wholly to Tawa. Tawa then would use only his vocal cords. He would use a bandana because he had to shield him from the light. Now, I witnessed total wisdom, total knowledge. This is the most incredible thing that anybody could. He had access to everything. You could go home and have a dream. The next day, Tawa would talk to you about it. You could have a conversation with God. The next day, Tawa would talk to you about it, or he'd call you right in the middle of it. Because I experienced this, and it was truly fascinating. When I found Tawa.
Wait, hold on, Frank. Hold on. So, just to be clear for the audience, so Tawa was working through Ray, but also Tawa works through you as well. This entity can move as it will, or no. Tawa only came through Ray. Now listen, what was his name? Name of direction? Ray. He was like, of course, yes.
So Tawa only comes through Ray. Now Tawa said that he was emanating from the prophet Elijah. He also told us that he emanated through John the Baptist at the time of Christ. Okay, I know it's far-fetched, and my scientific mind had a really hard time with all of this, but I want you to know that after 18 years of working with him, he didn't have to prove anything to me. When Tawa first started, when I met Ray, I was reading all kinds of prophets. I was reading Camus. I was reading different, Hermann Hesse, Nietzsche, Will Durant. When I met Tawa, I was so flabbergasted. I put all my books away. I haven't read the Nag Hammadi papers. I mean, I've sort of skimmed through them a little bit.
Well, you've read the Gospel of Thomas. I know that.
I read the Gospel of Thomas. This came much later, yes. And the Gospel of Thomas, I think, is the most unbelievable gospel that's out there. But it's like in Thomas 8 says, the man is like a wise fisherman who cast his net into the sea and drew it up from the sea full of small fish. Among them, the wise fisherman found a large fish. He threw all the small fish back into the sea and chose the large fish without difficulty. Whoever has ears, let them hear. When I met Tawa, he was the large fish, and I just couldn't go back to anything else because everything else I read paled compared to what he was bringing to the table. But the one beauty of this is that the truth will resonate with each individual. Let me give you just a little background on Ray and Tawa. When Ray met Tawa, he was agnostic, and he was an alcoholic, and he was a shrewd businessman. When this started happening to him, the first time Tawa spoke is when he sat in a chair, and all of a sudden the voice started to come through. It freaked him out. He and his wife were just going crazy, didn't know what was happening to them. They would go out. They were partiers and boozers. They would go out on the town, and they'd come home totally smashed. Ray would get to the refrigerator, and all of a sudden Tawa would start to come. He'd feel the chills, and Tawa would come. and Ray would fall down just on the floor right there next to the refrigerator. Tawa would talk for a few minutes, and he'd say, talk for 10 minutes, and he'd say, when I come back, Ray will be totally sober. And Ray was totally sober.
Wow, I need that better than an AA meeting. That's what I need sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. When he'd be driving his car, Tawa would say, pull over, pull over. He'd pull over, and all of a sudden his tire would explode. When the shuttle went up, they asked Tawa if it was going to be successful. The only thing he said was they were going to have a problem with the O-ring. But he didn't go into any detail. This was when the space shuttle went up. And the other thing, this is the most, to me, is the most important thing, was that Ray was so excited when Tawa started speaking through him that he went to meet with Oprah. He wanted to bring him to the world. Of course, you know, when you find something like this, you want to share it with everybody. But I'm sure in his mind he had some thoughts of commercialism, commercial enterprise. So they did hook up with Oprah and in Chicago, because that's where Ray was from, and they arranged a meeting in a motel, and they just figured that Oprah would send her people there and Tawa would come. Oprah did send her people there, and they waited and they waited and they waited. Tawa never came. When they walked out the door, then Tawa came, and he said, "We are not for entertainment. We are not for entertainment."
Makes sense. Frank, and just again to clarify for the audience as we continue this, how would you classify Tawa? Are we talking this is an ancient spirit? Was Tawa once immortal? I mean, I know labels are labels, but
sure.
These things point to something for some people.
Basically, the prophet Elijah is, a manifestation of the divine, of the pleroma. Tawa is just because he knew he was coming to Montana, he used something that people could relate to, an incarnation of that energy. The prophet Elijah has incarnated many, many times. Tawa was an incarnation that he used just to communicate with us, but he was a man. He was actually a Blackfeet Indian. And when he first said, when she said Blackfoot Indian, he said, no, Blackfeet Indian, which is something that they would never understand, but anybody being in Montana would. So he's basically using the name of direction of Tawa as a name of direction. That's it. And he basically communicates through spirit. Like I said, what happened was Ray's soul would actually leave his body. Tawa's soul would come into Ray's body, and the only thing that he would use were his vocal cords. At least that's where it started. Now, when he said to them, we're not for entertainment, then they asked him, they said, well, how many people are we going to expose ourselves to? They expected thousands, right? He said, no, tens. He said, we will be meeting in the tens. So the group around Tawa was going to be a very small group by design, and they're never to be used for financial gain of any kind. One thing was interesting. I was so excited when I found this. My grandson's father was an atheist, and I was so excited to bring him this knowledge because I was like overwhelmed. I was like a child in a candy store. And my grandson, I thought, I'm going to prove to this boy that God exists. So I took him to Ray, and he was about 32 years old at the time. And Ray, there's another level we called Rewa. It was another level of Tawa that was a little bit more personal. And I thought, okay, dazzle him. Tell him everything he needs to know. We asked him all these questions. Tawa gave him nothing. He gave him nothing. And I thought, this can't be. He's not answering any questions. The only thing he said to him was that if you continue this course, within 2 years, you'll be going home. And of course, the kid left there laughing, Within 2 years, he was dead.
Wow.
And so who got the proof? The boy didn't get any proof. I got the proof because I knew and this is what I'm trying to say. If an atheist or an agnostic searches with the mind, searches without belief and faith, God will not prove anything. He can search till he can dig a hole to China. God will not give him an understanding of who he is. That only comes with belief and faith. And that comes through Matthew 13:12. Whoever has been given more and more will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even that which he has will be taken away. Without belief and faith, there's no path. I mean, let's put it this way. God loves, even to be an atheist is a position. The soul knows that God exists. You can't separate yourself from God. God loves an atheist as much as he loves the man who is totally devout. It's just that when the atheist goes home, he'll realize that, oh, that was interesting, and he'll start again. It's not a big deal to God. It's
Yes, I think a seeker always, it's better for finding, as you said, the divine doesn't have to prove, but I'm sure sometimes the divine works through skeptics and so forth, whatever vehicle is needed. But here's the question, because this brings back to Paul. Paul was said to have persecuted Christians. He was a man of faith, but it seemed he was a man of the tribal god Yahweh, of the faith of the tribal god. Is this, again, a rewriting of history, or was Paul...
I asked that question to Ray. I asked that question. And he said, persecuted not like you think. Persecuted, basically, his persecution was that he looked down at his fellow disciples and realized and thought that they didn't get it. They didn't understand.
Like Marcion said. Very interesting, yes.
It was not a persecution in terms of, and I could show you the passage where Stephen, now the other thing about Stephen, you don't know this, but Stephen is James. Stephen is James. His name was Stephen James, the brother of Jesus. And it's the same disciple that was thrown off. In fact, Tawa gave us the full story. He was thrown off the church, was hit with a club. And I'll tell you what's interesting about that, Miguel, is that he was hit with a club, and then the disciples grabbed him, took him into a cave, and he was waiting for Peter to come and heal him, and Peter did heal him. But what's really interesting is that when Eisman wrote that book, James, the brother of Jesus.
Right, yes.
Ray is driving down the road with a man who was related to the James soul. And he was so excited to find this book. Ray's driving down the road, and they're talking, and his name was Stephen. And he was telling him about the book that he found, the story about the brother of Jesus. Well, Ray is driving down the road. This book, have you seen that book? It's huge. It's like
yes, I've read it. Yes, I read it once.
It's unbelievably thick. Ray's driving down the road. He says, hand me the book. Because Tawa had just told us the story about how Stephen was thrown off the church tower and hit with a club. And they're driving down the road. Ray as he's driving down the road, he puts his thumb through part of the book. And he said, read this. He didn't even look at the book. He just stuck his thumb in it. He said, read this to Steve. And Steve is reading the story about that Tawa had just told us. Those are the kind of things I experienced that sort of take all the mystery and just throw right on you. Did you understand where I'm coming from there?
Yes, I do understand. And I guess the next question I have for you, and I'm sure we will move to the Archons, is Ray passed away.
Yes.
So who speaks through you, Frank, for the listener? Because again, as we both know, you still are an oracle.
Okay, we're right there, so we're in sync. The Oracle Ephesius, who is the Oracle of Apollo. Now, trust me, Miguel, this happened to me when I was 20 years old. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I started writing prose, and I thought, this is weird. And when I met Tawa said, well, you've had this teacher trying to talk to you for 20 years, and you haven't connected. So my teacher's name is Ephesius. But if you look at the word Ephezeus, God here. If you look at the name Elijah, God here. It's the same exact name. They are related. And they're related in the way that, for example, a lot of people don't realize Elijah is matched up with Elisha. Apollo is matched up with Hermes. Horus is matched up with Thoth. And Tawa is matched up with Chino. What they are is when spirit comes in the masculine sense from the other side, it is so cryptic, you could never understand it unless it's filtered through what I call a Rosetta Stone. And the Rosetta Stone is a man who receives the words and is able to translate them. But even then, Miguel, I can tell you that even as much as they've given me, I haven't even scratched, because of my human mind, I haven't even scratched the surface. I don't think that I could ever bring the message down 100%. I could just do the best that I can. Now, when I finally connected with Ephesius, and I started receiving these cryptic quatrains, I still did not believe it. I didn't believe them. I thought, this is stupid. Because I finally read about Nostradamus. I read about the Oracle of Delphi, and I gave you a quatrain. That was kind of interesting, wasn't it?
Yes, I've had some interesting revelations since then, and they continue.
Well, good. So what they had to convince me 100% that this thing was real, and I'll tell you how they did it. I go to Las Vegas on an art, because I'm an artist also. I went on an art trip there. And I'm in Las Vegas, and I'm thinking there's about 8 people that have started seeing Tawa. So I thought, okay, I'm going to buy them a gift. So I walked into this gift shop. And have you ever seen those stones that have the word trust or joy or love? They're just rocks.
Oh, yeah. My wife likes to give me these here and there with different faith messages.
Well, good. So what happens is I went into the shop, and I thought about all those individuals that were going to Tawa, and each one of them, I picked out a stone. One said wisdom, one said joy, one said love, one said risk, one says fear, one says magic, one says peace. I didn't think, all I was doing was thinking about the stone for the individual. Then I thought, I needed to do something more. So what I decided to do is, instead of just trust, I got a piece of paper and I wrote in my position, and I folded it up and put the stone in the paper. With the stone that said wisdom, I folded it up and I wrote of the ages. The stone that said joy, I folded it up and said bring me joy. The one about love, and all of them. So I took the stones, I wrote a piece of paper, and that was it. I gave it to them. I thought it was done, right? So I'm sitting there that weekend. I gave everybody the stone. I gave everybody the paper that was with the stone. I'm sitting there listening to Tawa, and I'm kind of looking in kind of, not really meditation, but I look up at the ceiling. I'll never forget this, Miguel, because it's going to sound bizarre. All the stones were floating in the ceiling, and all the papers were right next to them, and they had just created an oracle. And the oracle is telling people how to walk whenever you're stuck in a hard situation. This is what the message, I call it the message of the stones. It said this. I looked and I thought, and I had to go grab a piece of paper, look up in the ceiling, and I wrote it all down. People aren't going to believe this, are they?
Oh, some will. This is fascinating.
It said, with the love of myself, I will trust in my position. I will proceed forward without fear and risk in any direction. For within me is the wisdom of the ages that will guide me with the magic of the eye to bring me joy, the peace of the heart. Random stones picked for these people, random sayings picked, and all of a sudden I get an oracle. And they had my attention then. Then I knew something was going on that was real, and I shouldn't deny it. So that's basically the teacher. Now basically all I need to do is, and he won't talk all the time, but if I ask a question, I think I told you when you asked me the question, I said, well, I'll go to Florida and I'll sit down, meditate, and ask a question. But when I asked the question, you asked me that night, I go sit down on the sofa, and all of a sudden, boom, those words were there to tell you. So they'll communicate with whoever they want, but always in these cryptic quatrains, these 4-line cryptic riddles, and those lines are tumultuous in their knowledge. You can study them the rest of your life and you'll get a different meaning. Now, what's interesting, in the back of the book, Voice of the Angel, the Healing Oracles from the City of God, anybody that has a name that I've received an oracle for, I've listed it as a name, and they can go to that oracle with their name on it, and they'll be able to meditate on that oracle, and that oracle will speak personally to any of them that have. There's one that for Michael, there's one for Nancy. There's all different ones. Now, what I'd like to do, because I'm headed towards the Archons, I'd like to summarize the story of creation, the original picture puzzle box that they gave me. Is that okay?
Yeah, please go ahead, Frank. Let's hear about creation.
The summary of creation. The gnosis of creation is a single entity, Adam, which was masculine, who was all of us, seeks to give his love, but there's no one there to receive it. From his side, he extends a portion of himself into the feminine, Eve. Now she draws his love offering onto herself, but because of her nature and how she was created, the desire to receive being a constant, within her is a fatal flaw, an unquenchable thirst we call the void, a thought that can never be filled. Although she ferociously reaches outside of herself to attempt to fill the void, it's futile. That is free will, the flaw that she passes on to the men. When asked by God what happened, she blames the serpent. He blames the woman. Blame is the propellant that keeps the creation spiraling out of control, and this is what fuels the Archons. Eventually, the interplay of the two give rise to an understanding that all comes to the surface, that this problem, this thirst, can only be solved by inaction, by being in the still in the love of God. This is the oracle that came, Oracle 401. Adam and Eve, the arm and the sleeve, stressed to relieve the harm of the sieve, keepers of time, peeved to define, helper of mind, the rule of the climb. The interplay of the masculine and feminine, basically from this unknowledgeable position, from this position of blame, we start to sift and become and slowly become. Well, actually, we started spiritual and became more human, became coarser and coarser in the human mind, and the goal is to become more spiritual and sift through the coarseness of who we are and to bring forth a spiritual being. So at the end of the creation, they have an offering to show that they have an understanding. So they project an ending. Cain and Abel is the ending. See, Cain and Abel is not a continuous story. It is the ending of the creation. They attempted an attempted resolution, a potential ending of the creation. Cain gives to God a love offering. The grains he cultivated, watered, fertilized, nurtured, and harvested. A free will, contrived understanding of mind, or the God of religion and its rules and rituals. Abel exemplifies the still. He returns to God what is God's. A sheep that is God, that God fed with the grasses in the fields, watered from the streams. All he did was shepherd over it. He returns his free will to God by not contriving an understanding of God, but by his gnosis and the giving of God, what is God's. An understanding of self-love by just walking forward in his life and acting as loving in every situation that confronts him. But in this attempted ending of the two, greed is in play. Cain's ego is more powerful and jealous. He cannot accept the outcome of this ending. It's too simple. He overpowers Abel. His contrived offering to God, religion, overcomes and destroys the true spiritual understanding of self. Cain kills the thought of relinquishing free will and becomes a wanderer in the land of Nod, a term which means wanderer, with a mask, the mark of Cain, so that no one will recognize him and kill him. The mask is what faces us every day. The hurts that come to us that originate as an attraction to the realm of the Archons. But the knowledge of Abel eventually will return and reincarnate as Seth, with Christ, the prophets, the bodhisattvas, to illuminate and influence the world with an original understanding, original thought that had been overcome, self-love, aiding all in relinquishing free will by returning to God what is God. The main thing about the Cain and Abel story is Cain tried to contrive an understanding of God with his human mind. Abel just gave to God what was God's. And that's what God wants from us. He doesn't want us to follow some religious path to him. He wants us to walk every day and face whatever comes to us. Now, what comes to us is interesting, is the mark of Cain. All those people that bring you hurt are masked. That's why a lot of times they come through attraction. They're masked to you, or else you would. If you hurt somebody in a past life, and they hurt you in a past life, whatever, and they come to this life, you'd avoid them like the plague. So the only way that we can resolve issues of confrontation is by placing a mask over it. And when you finally realize that everybody that hurts you is you, it's just bringing you knowledge that you've given, and that's the law. The mark of Cain is the mask, the confrontation. And understand it, that what faces us through the actions of others is self-created, all pain and suffering. The person of condition that faces us is hidden karma. This is the way Thomas places it. Jesus said, recognize what is in your sight. That which is hidden from you will become plain to you, for there is nothing hidden which will not become manifest. What you dislike in the person that confronts you is bearing your own sin. This is the quatrain. The mark of Cain, a mask in name, can hide the reason for the blame. The truth will come. You'll see the one. You'll view the act that killed the son. Blame is the propellant. Your hurts are masked from you. They're returning to you. And that's what God wants us to resolve. And unfortunately, when somebody hurts us, we retaliate back with our ego and try to resolve the situation that way. But that is the realm of the Archons. That's why they have so much power over us, because we don't have an understanding of the creation.
That's a really powerful myth, and I don't mean myth as in fiction. I mean as an interior world. So it's very fascinating. Of course, the idea of blame certainly resonates, because as I found in my life, the less I blame, the more responsibility I take, the wider my consciousness gets, and the more gnosis I have. So good insight, Frank.
Well, the problem is that blame is, blame is the whole fuel for this whole creation. If there was no blame, if everybody just accepted what was coming through them with a smile and say, okay, it's coming back to me, and love through it. But how do you love someone that hurts you so badly? How do you do that? And if you don't, it'll come back to you in another life. You can't escape it. It's constant. You just, when you get to where I'm at, no matter what comes to you, and you'll see that is the key to the ending of the Archon. That is the key to protection from the Archon. And we'll get to that in a little bit.
Blame, and of course, I'm sure you mean forgiveness as well, instead of just full acceptance.
Well, who do you have to forgive? If something's coming back to you, you only have to forgive yourself. And in my book, I wrote a story about an abusive stepfather. And I went to Ray, and my stepfather was, I don't think I told the story. My stepfather was dying, and I felt so bad. I felt really bad, and I thought, I've got to do something for him. So I said, what can I do for my stepfather who was dying? And he was in so much pain. And Ray said, go to him. Now, this man abused me as a child. It was just a mental abuse. It's nothing big deal. But he says, go to him and ask him to forgive you. Now, I'm the child that was abused who has to go to my stepfather who abused me and ask him to forgive me. That's what Ray told me. That was a huge lesson for me. And I said, what do you mean? Then I understood what he was saying. He's just telling me the law. And I said, but I can't tell him. He would never understand it. He'd never understand that flip-flop. He said, go to him in the spirit of forgiveness and tell him in your mind, please forgive me. Now I understand. And he will go home. I went to my stepfather, and I'm basically on a human terms telling him, oh, I'm okay. Don't worry. We're okay. There's nothing, we came out of this all right. I don't hold any animosity towards you or anything. And underneath that, I'm saying to myself, please forgive me. You have revealed my own sin. And the man turns to me and he says, Frank, you have released me. Within 2 days, he died. He was gone.
And you were released too. You must have felt so much freedom.
I was released. It was released realizing that hurt came from myself. That's why there is no blame. blame someone for bringing you back what come. The human mind will not accept this. And that's where the Archons have their power, because it's juxtaposed to this. But let's go a little further.
And also the other point, and I have a feeling it's going to tie in what you're going to say now, is the void. It's that thought that can never be sated. In the beginning, the void is where, again, it's the insatiable thought and where the Archons come from.
That void, that insatiable thought, coming from the desire to, and I'm going to cover that in a minute, the desire to receive. But under the hands of the Archon, that desire to receive, the Archons really are a turbocharger to the human mind. They're like a turbocharger does to an engine, is what the Archons do to the human mind. And what they do is they will take that thought, the desire to receive, and turn it into full-blown greed. And when it gets to that point, then it's almost impossible. It's like a freight train going up against a mosquito. But that's basically, and I'm going to cover that a little bit in a minute here.
Yeah, and it should be said, what you're saying is very much harkens to some of the Gnostic myths of the one becoming aware and Barbelo becoming the receiver of his thoughts and sort of creation emanating. So what you're saying is definitely found in the Nag Hammadi library, even though you've just skimmed it, Frank.
Yeah, I'm glad, because like I said, there's truth in all of it. And it's all there. It's just finding, which pieces were created that are not part of the truth. And that's difficult to do. To understand these Archons, we must understand the creation. The most important part, and this is part of one of the untruths. For example, from the pleroma can only come good, can only come love. So why does the demiurge say, is considered a bad god? Why is that? He's not. The reflection of the demiurge that comes from the Kenoma is the one that says there's no other gods above me, but not the demiurge, the real demiurge, just the reflection. Did that make any sense?
Good point. It makes perfect sense. So you would say the Archons, even for the listener that might be wondering, are they sentient beings, or they're more like in Kabbalah, the Kelepoth? They're sort of wasted shards of existence, semi-aware entities that just follow their function.
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you both the microcosm and the macrocosm of the Archons today. And basically, they are mechanical beings that we created, and I'm going to tell you that story here in a minute. So let me go a little further, and then I'll get full. I promise I'll go through that very quickly, and it'll make so much sense. I'm just trying to lead up to it.
Yeah, please do. Take your time. This is wonderful.
So once we understand the pleroma can only give us good, then anything that has evil in it is coming from the world and coming from that desire to receive. To understand the Archons, we have to understand God, we have to understand Christ, we have to understand God Father, God Mother, and God Son. God Father, the Demiurge, God Mother, Sophia, God Son, the One or Horus. We also have to understand that there are two types of men in the world. Paul referred to them as the psychic and the pneumatic. You familiar with those two terms, Miguel?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay. They're two different men. The psychic is a soul that's ready to go home. He's being called. The pneumatic is a soul that's gone home and basically came here to help, like Paul. Paul was a pneumatic. But he says, I came to you as a psychic. The reason he says he came to you as a psychic is because that's Saul, not Paul. Saul is different than Paul. To do what Paul needed to do, he had to have the knowledge of being human. And so he comes to you as a pneumatic. But he does, and he says, I was chosen from my mother's womb. These are the sons of God. You've heard of the Anunnaki and the Bodhisattvas.
Oh, yes.
The Anunnaki, the sons of God always come to harvest gold, but not the gold of the mineral type, the gold of an incorruptible relationship with the Father. That's what they come here to do. That's who the Anunnaki are. They're sons of God. The devil and the Archons and the powers and principalities, we have to get an understanding of them. They are the turbocharging the desire to receive to turn it into greed. The Archon, the main Archon, although he is a reflection of the Demiurge, he's also a machine. And then we have to have an understanding of karma. Let's start with God. Let's take the big guy.
Yeah, let's take the big guy.
Innameable, ineffable. When Buddha was asked about God, I don't know if you've heard this before, he would always go silent. And people say, well, he didn't believe in God. No, he understood God to the extreme. He understood that the human mind cannot even touch the hem of God. We can't fathom what it is. We can't even have a discussion about him. This God is called ineffable, the silent name. The teacher calls him the silent name. He is a triune singularity of Creator, the Son, which is Christ, and the Holy Spirit, which is the active portion of God. If the whole of creation was a lemon, let me talk about Christ for a minute. If the whole of creation was a lemon, then Christ would be the aroma of the lemon. It pervasive. It permeates the skin. It permeates the pulp. It permeates the fruit. It permeates the juice and the lemon juice and the oil. That's Christ in the creation. Christ is the essence of the love of God. Now, this God that we know, this singularity, this triune singularity, actually divides into three aspects. God the Father, Osiris, the Demiurge. God the Mother, Isis, Sophia. God the Son, Horus, or the One. Thomas says, where there are three gods, they are gods. Where there are two or one, I am with him. This is the way the teacher places it. The name, in quatrain 334, the name of God divides, you see, according to the action be. Be becomes divining three. Three that guides the gods to be. And the term to be is the definition of the name Yahweh. You familiar with that, Miguel?
Yes, I am, Frank.
So this singularity eventually divides into three aspects: God Father, God Mother, and God Son. The Demiurge, God Mother Sophia, and God Son Horus, or the One. And the teacher also calls it divining three. This is the tree of life that eventually will guide all the souls back home. To understand the Archons, we have to have an understanding of free will. Imagine free will this way. If God had 11 balls in his hand, he throws them up in the air, and they go, as they go in the air and they start hitting each other, he doesn't know which balls are going to hit. But when they land at his feet, he knows exactly where they're going to land. So he knows the beginning and he knows the end. He does not know the middle. The middle is our free will. The actions pertaining to those balls hitting each other is our free will. And that's where karma is concerned, because all those interactions between people, he doesn't guide those. He just lets them happen, and eventually they will resolve on their own. This is what the teacher said in terms of karma. This is quatrain 285. The predisposition creates the condition. The destiny comes with roads and partitions. The choices in life are acts of omission. The love of oneself relieves the attrition. Now, what he's saying is that we are predisposed to get into situations, especially when destiny, and not everything is destiny, but a lot of what we deal in life is destiny, because karma comes to us like a glass of water to a thirsty man in the desert. He has free will to reject it. But when karmic situations are placed in front of us, we all just kind of lunge after them because the thirst is so incredible. And the teacher says the choices in life are acts of omission. Things that we tried to walk away from in the past are the choices that we will be presented to today. And the love of oneself relieves the attrition. The attrition is where the Archons work. And I'll tell you, and let me throw you an understanding of Thomas 97. that shows you attrition. Are you familiar with that one, Miguel? 97?
97. No, I have to look it up. What does it say?
Okay, that's fine. Jesus said, I'm going to put, I inserted a word to make this easier to understand. Jesus said, understanding the kingdom of the Father is like a certain woman who had been carrying a jar full of meal. While she was walking on the road, still some distance from home, the handle of the jar broke, and the meal emptied, and behind her on the road, she did not realize, she had not noticed no accident. When she reached her house, she set the jar down and found it empty. That's how the Archons work in our life.
It's a great saying. I've always taken my interpretation is that Sophia who has lost all the divine sparks in the universe. But go ahead and give us your take, Frank.
Okay. So basically, it's by the act of attrition and just living a human life, the Archons are stealing our essence unnoticed, slowly. One thing is, you've heard on the internet that they feed on negative emotions. Have you heard that, Miguel?
Yes, very much. Yeah, that's not uncommon. I've dealt with it in some of my writings.
Well, I'm going to tell you, they don't feed on negative emotions. They stimulate negative emotions so that they can steal our essence. What is our essence? Our chi or our ka, our very life force. There's a limited amount for any of us.
Yeah, or our divine spark, if you would.
Divine spark. It's that life force. And what they do is they come in and they stimulate our negative emotions. And when we're in that position of fear, they actually suck out our life force and take it onto themselves. This is the way the teacher placed it in Quatrain 219. And he places it under feminine. And you'll see that I will refer to the Archons as the winged being. That's how I call them, the winged being. Girls with wings, they call them things. To the sight of fear they bring. Give them the time, they'll stretch the dime and show the way of troubled time. What the teacher's saying is that when you exist in this fear position, and even though something might seem insignificant, the more you dwell on this insignificant thought, they'll stretch that dime. They'll turn it into something great and something tremendously significant. This is another one, this quatrain. If wings are real, the heart is steel, and encasement to the feel. It takes some time for light to shine and melt away the troubled time. And what the teacher is basically saying is, as these winged beings start to suck off your ka, your chi, or ka, basically what happens is you're left with sort of a lack, sort of a unemotional. A sociopath would be someone who's almost completely used up. You start feeling this sort of emptiness, this sort of depressive position, and a lot of times it comes through anger. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and understand, and we are getting to the winged beings. I'm going to go to an understanding of love. In the first creation, there was nothing but love. God's love emanated. The symbol for it is the sun. To love in the giving is the receiving. Taoist said, the creation is singular, once. The beginnings are many. You'll see in the Gospel of Thomas where he says, you search for the beginning that you look for the end. He's not talking about the creation. He's talking about the beginning. Taoist said, the creation was singular. The beginnings are many. In the creation, God created the 11. I think I mentioned them the last time. I'll try to go through this kind of fast. A lot of it's in the last lecture. Those 11, and he also referred to them as 1100. Now understand, spiritual numbers are not what we think. You ever heard of the 500 that Jesus met?
Yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
Those he did. Somebody count those guys? 500 people.
Well, you never know. He's supposed to be God. He's supposed to know.
500 has a meaning. It means the sphere of influence. It's like if I threw a rock in the water and it started having these ripples, the last ripple that felt the impact would be the 500. So these numbers, spiritual numbers, Tao always said, to you, 2 + 2 = 4. To us, it's 5 or 500. The numbers are not meaningful in terms of human thought, but they're meaningful in terms of expressing a position. He creates 11 thoughts. These 11 thoughts, Paul refers to them as saints. In Ephesians 1:1, Paul calls them the saints. They eventually become the 12 disciples. Those 11 souls were around Apollonius, and they were around Christ. They were the original thoughts that created by God. He create in these thoughts basically expressed. These thoughts will eventually express the love of God. So I'm only going to give you a few because that's all my feeble brain could come up with. Kindness.
Go ahead.
Kindness, concern, compassion, caring. Let's say kindness, concern, compassion, caring. They will eventually encompass and define the love of God. It's God took everything from himself and created these 11. Everything was there, created these 11 thoughts. Tao expressed the fact that God showered his love on these 11 thoughts, and he drew the love because they didn't know how to love themselves. He drew the love from them. He showered his love and drew the love from him. Now God says, okay, you can join. Those 11 thoughts come together like an LED flashlight to create a single beam. That is the original being. That flashlight, now that single beam that comes out of love, is the beam that came into being before he came into being. And there's another name. You know what the other name for him is?
What's that?
Christ.
Ah, makes sense.
Blessed is he who came into being before he came into being. Because remember, Christ is pervasive. Now, the completeness of that thought joining created in the essence of the love of God. But the other thing that's kind of interesting is that when it says God created man in his own image, in the image of God, he created him male and female and androgynous. This is the first manifestation of Christ. Christ was, another name for him is Adam Kadmon, or a spiritual Adam. But it is really what it is. It's exactly, those thoughts had no knowledge. They were just love. When Christ emanates in the world, he has no knowledge. And what that means is exactly Christ does not need life after life to gain knowledge. He just is love, he is the love of God. So that original being who came into being was Christ, the first emanation. Tawa placed it this way: to begin with nothing and to finish with everything. So when that imagine this being, now this being encompassed the whole of creation. And now this being, the only thing it wants to do is to love, because think of it as Christ. He wants to love. He goes out and what does he find? Nothing. And Tawa says, to begin with nothing, to finish with everything. When that Christ then comes from you at the end, he has everything to love. There's love to be given absolutely everywhere. So Tawa said, this being, that's what it means that came into being before he comes into being. It's two manifestations of Christ. The very first one, Adam Kadmon, or the very last one. When this being went out to release his love and there was no one to love, it's as if God's love was held within a fist. Imagine that love not being able to be released. And the name Yahweh, the very first Y in Yahweh, means Yod, which means exactly that, fist. The love of God was held within a fist. This is what Corinthians says. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last man, Adam, became a life-giving spirit. And he's actually talking about the manifestation of the first and the last. Are we doing okay, Miguel?
No, we're doing great. It's, again, this harkens, but it's a great reflection and take on many of those ancient Gnostic myths. My suspicion is that you are on to the truth, very powerful truth. But
only what I've been given. That's all I can do.
Just to segue and to sort of stick to the Archons, I'd like to bring in Westworld, because we did talk about how Westworld really reflects this idea of the Archons and creation.
Okay.
But we can get to it if you want to get to it in a minute
Well,
and
let
finish
me,
up.
if I can get through this, and then we're going right into the Archons. And I actually there's a place where it actually shows up in the journey of the Archon. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have first in the term Yahweh is fist. Now, where's this love going to go? It can't stay there in God's hand in his fist. It has to go out. So what happens is, because the love could not be given, it could not receive. So the first cause was to give the love. The first reaction was splitting off of the desire to receive. That is Eve. That's the split of the sun and the moon. So Corinthians says, for in Adam all die. And then he says, also in Christ will all be made alive. The fall is actually the split. The split is where the fall, and the split was where the beginning of free will starts. The first effect was a desire to receive. It's feminine, creating the void. Now what happens? Now we have a void. We have something that's desiring to receive. Now the thought, and what happens to these, remember these thoughts were singular? Now there's another extension that reverts back to the 11. It goes back. It can no longer stay together because part of it's already split off into creating the world. Now it goes back. Those 11 thoughts now are individual entities or sparks, as you say, that can incarnate into the portion of the creation that's split off. And the second letter in Yahweh, which is H, means window. This love that was held in a fist now can be released through this window, which is the void. And this is what Thomas says, on the day when you were one, you became two, but when you become two, what will you do? The original being extended. Now, that doesn't mean when something extends, it's like a set of slides. One slide precedes another. It just projects through that slide and creates another slide and another slide and another slide. Those slides so the original being is still there in all of his glory. The original 11 are all there in their glory. They just keep extending, and they can be accessed at any time through the pleroma. So what happens is, this is what Edgar Casey says. Christ was still there in the split. It says, when did Jesus become aware? This is Edgar Casey. When did Jesus become aware that he would be Savior of the world? When he fell in Eden. The fall was the split, the extension of the desire to receive. So Christ knew that there was nothing to give. The being that came into being has to come into being again through each individual spark. And those individual sparks can only understand who they are once they've gone through the karma of joining in the kanoma. Free will. So the best way to see it, this fragmentation reverting back to the 11, is in the fragmentation of Osiris, who's been ripped apart. Now those 11 thoughts are being ripped apart again. And in Thomas 18, it says, the disciples said to Jesus, tell us how the end will be. Jesus says, have you discovered then the beginning, that you look for the end? For where the beginning is, the end will be. Blessed is he who takes his place in the beginning. He will know the end and will not experience death.
One of my favorite sayings.
Free will. When those sparks decided to incarnate into the desire to receive, or the void, individually, they became the destruction or the ripping apart of Osiris, or the beginning of the demiurge. Now, so what's interesting is when Osiris is ripped to pieces, people realize he's been ripped into 14 pieces. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Oh, yeah, of course. Great myth.
The 11, the original 11, the 12th was his penis that was swallowed by a fish. The only way to get that penis back is to go fishing with Christ. The 13th is Sophia. The 14th is Horus. Now we have the full-blown creation of what I call the supernal triad.
Yeah, Sophia is referred to as living in the 13th aeon in, I think, the Pistis Sophia. Interesting.
So now we have officially the 14 pieces. Now the piece that's missing is Osiris. It says, so what happens now? Jesus said, if they say to you, where do you come from? You say, we came from the light, the place where the light came into being on its own accord and established itself to become manifest through their image. That light that joined those 11 thoughts, that was the complete light, the being that came into being, was the light they're referring to. But that's where they originated. Understand, each one of those sparks now has a memory of that experience because it extends. So what happens now, the first spark, Taoist said this, he said, think of those 11 sparks now are still there. One of those 11 held the thought greater than all the others. So he's holding the thought, I've got to give this love. I have to give this love. And he jumps into the void first. But what happens is, this is the way in Quatrain 328 the teacher expresses it. Afraid of the dark, the light from the start. All of a sudden, he leaves a place of complete light and jumps into this blackness. And all of a sudden, for the first time, he realizes, I am individual. And he becomes fearful. The first emotion was fear that entered the sparks. The second emotion was possession. And possession is the beginning of ego, I am.
And there you have it, the first part of Frank's interview, based on his book, Voice of the Angel, as well as other disturbing but amazing insights. In the second part, Frank really ramps up his revelations on the Archons and how the universe came into existence. As mentioned in the intro, when it comes to the nature and reality of the Archons, Frank really gets Westworld / Battlestar Galactica / Philip K. Dick. It's wonderful high weirdness and Gnosis on steroids. Don't miss it and make me release the Kraken. So please join for a mere $5.99 a month. Beyond full interviews, you'll get more than 350 episodes with the best and brightest in Gnosticism, Western esoteric, and free thought. You'll also be invited to our Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group, where we have some remarkable discussions, and past guests hang out there too, like Tim Freak, Robert Price, Andrew Phillips Smith, Scott Smith, and Robert Sullivan. And I'm always there to answer your questions or issues too. It's interesting that only 1% of listeners have become subscribers. I feel many of you are missing out on essential content for that essential gnosis to break out of the enslavement of the Archons and their butt slaves in the establishment. Of course, if you've got holes in your pocket, just let me know, and I'll be glad to send any of the complete shows to you. Regardless, becoming a member really helps keep this Red Pill Cafeteria open. You can also become a patron at Patreon, where you get some of the same benefits. Or maybe a few shekels here or there via PayPal or the US mail. I can't do it without you, in more ways than one. All forms of support are found at, you got it, thegodabovegod.com. Let us continue bagging us some Archons. Yee-haw! But defeating these princes of pain starts with knowing who you really are and knowing they're there in the first place, hidden in the very fabric of a fallen cosmos. It's all fun and games until someone loses a third eye. Then it's just fun and it's just Gnosis. Hello and goodbye as always.
Calcium is good for your bones.
Is it?
Not really, actually. The type of calcium that's inside of milk depletes the calcium in your bones.
Really?
What's up with this?
Nothing.
We doing ad-libs?
The fuck do you think
Nothing's
we're doing?
planned.
Oh.
I can't even hear myself. All of this shit with us. These goddamn headphones. This goddamn microphone. Can't hear myself. Never hear myself.
6 figures don't mean shit to me. I roll a crit on you like D&D. I've had a blunt since Snoop Deal Double G. And I can spirit at your body like DNT. The lattice work of the blasphemy. Mathematically affects the inner workings of a person manifested. A pathology, something you ought to see. You're fucking oddity. Go ahead and smile at me, but I am not a joke. I'm trying to do something meaningful before I croak. And I suppose the fact that we come back should help me relax, but it brings on attacks of nervousness. I'm just finding out what my purpose is. Chosen as a warrior, gotta fight, gotta bring the light, make it through the night for all intents and purposes. Just fuck worthlessness. If you're feeling down, my sound is the antithesis. Solar luminescence sustains me like photosynthesis. No emphasis on any of my enemies. Fucking with nobody unless they are a friend to me. Listen, the industry has got no room for me, so I make my own. Before too long, they're gonna be begging me, please pick up the phone. I don't think you understand, please forget my number, man. I don't need you sucking on my blood like Kiefer Sutherland. Phosphine ain't fucking around. I'm burning all this opposition down right to the ground. And if you don't think I might, then think twice, cause I'm probably crazy. I got that golden glow, money flow. I don't need your money, cause I'm wealthy in the soul. And it spreads to everybody in my tribe. Feel the vibe and be thankful you are alive. Sometimes with it, phosphine ain't fucking around. I burn it all this opposition down right to the ground. And if you don't think I might, then think twice, cause I'm probably crazy. I got that golden glow, money flow. I don't need your money, cause I'm wealthy in the soul. And it spreads to everybody in my tribe. So feel the vibe and get live. Yeah. Louisiana, where I come from, expected to fall in line, but I marched to my own drum. The son of a detective, it was way overprotective, with an affinity fully into me, making me feel like I was effective. Wearing these lenses, they're corrective, so I can see I'm nothing like these clones. Steadily channeling greatness, snorting lines of Alexander's bones, straight to the brain with a rolled up bill, sucking it up till I get my fill. No, I'm never gonna stop and I'm never gonna chill. I'm keeping it fresher than smoke on my will. You want a legend, baby, you looking at him. Take cover, run for the hills, cause when I blow up, it's like splitting atoms. I got the pyroclastic flow, setting Jabberley's on fire like a volcano. Been hiding in the shadows, now I'm taking my turn, teaching them the definition of slash and burn. Burn, burn it up, burn it up. That's that sugar cane. Burn it up, oh yeah, burn it up. Yeah, know what I'm talking about. What? Phosphine ain't fucking around. I'm burning all this opposition down right to the ground. And if you don't think I might, then think twice, cause I'm probably crazy. I got that golden glow, money flow. I don't need your money, cause I'm wealthy in the soul. And it spreads to everybody in my tribe. Feel the vibe and be thankful you are alive. Phosphine ain't fucking around. I'm burning all this opposition down right to the ground. And if you don't think I might think twice, it's gonna be out of my motherfucking mind. I got that golden glow, honey flow. I don't need your money, cause I'm wealthy in the soul. And it spreads to everybody in my tribe. So feel that vibe. I'm feeling it. Let's do it. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Phosphine, burning the opposition down to the ground. Don't be afraid. Don't run and cry and scream unless you're on the front row and you feel like throwing some panties on the stage. Or nice, cool. Fuck it.